Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old, an anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, it is Wednesday, April the 2nd, although to some of you it may seem like April the 1st. Fool's Day, it's so supposed to be something that Donald Trump is calling Liberation Day. More tariffs he's announced for today, suggesting that every purchase matters in Trump's America, in MAGA's America. But my guest today on the show has another take on why every purchase matters. In fact, he has a new book out. It's called Every Purchase Matters: How Fair Trade Farmers, Companies, and Consumers Are Changing the World. It's by Paul Price, our guest today, who is the founder of Fair Trade USA. And he is an expert on ethical trade. So happy Liberation Day, Paul.
Well, I appreciate the warm introduction, but we'll get into whether or not today is Liberation Day.
One of the reasons I was intrigued to talk to you, though, in all seriousness, both as the founder of Fair Trade USA and as the author of Every Purchase Matters, is that Trump in his own way is making trade ethical, or at least in his mind, making it ethical. What do you make, Paul, of tariffs? Is fair trade, the principle of fair trade, a kind of moral tariff? How would you think of tariffs?
Andrew, I can't believe you're conflating me with Trump and his policies. So let me make my position very clear. Trump is the furthest thing from fair trade. There's nothing fair about big stick diplomacy and manifest destiny, which is what Trump is practicing with his tariff policy. Tariffs are dumb. They're bad for American business. They're bad for sustainability. They're bad for consumers. So I'm happy to jump into the issue of tariffs, but don't bring fair trade anywhere near it. Fair trade is the antidote to Trump's backward policies.
You've given me the title for this show, Paul. Tariffs are dumb. And I don't want to make this just a critique of Trump. We have enough of those amongst podcasts and on the internet. So tell me a little bit about Fair Trade. When did you become the founder of Fair Trade USA? How did you discover this organization? I know it was originally founded in Oxford, in the UK.
Yeah, so I didn't invent fair trade. My claim to fame is that I brought the fair trade movement to the United States. I lived in Nicaragua for 11 years, right out of university, from 1983 to 94. I lived way up in the mountains. I worked with farmers, and I found the international development aid-based approach to poverty to be not entirely effective. And so I ended up hearing about fair trade in Europe. There were a couple of amazing companies in the US that were also practicing it, small companies like Equal Exchange. And so I created the first fair trade coffee co-op in Nicaragua in the summer of 1990. And over 4 years, I led that co-op. I organized 3,000 small coffee farmers into a cooperative that was processing coffee, adding value, and exporting direct, mostly to fair trade buyers in Europe. And what I witnessed was this incredible process of empowerment and a journey out of poverty in which small farmers were able to stay on the land and feed their kids and keep their kids in school and improve healthcare and housing. And that transformed me. Before that, I would say I was an anti-capitalist. And through that journey, I realized that market-based approaches and partnerships with business and with conscious consumers could actually be a very powerful lever for change. So, I had a front row seat on fair trade impact. I saw it work. And after 11 years in the field, I decided that I had a calling, and that was to come back to the US and see if I could translate this fair trade experiment in Europe to the US market and mainstream it. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
So, to borrow some words from Donald Trump, his Liberation Day, fair trade is a kind of Liberation Day for the coffee growers of Nicaragua or other farmers of goods around the world. Is that one way of thinking about it?
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I see fair trade as a way for farmers to achieve a better living for themselves and their families and to protect the environment through this very simple concept of a fair price for a great product. In fact, the early fair traders had a slogan. They said, trade, not aid, right? And it was the whole notion that farmers don't need our charity. They just need to be paid a fair price for all the hard work that they put into the coffee and the bananas and the other products that we consume. And so, at its core, fair trade is about empowerment. It's about, helping farmers and workers find the self-confidence to become architects of their own futures through this more equitable market transaction.
I often think of fair trade as a kind of ethical tax, which as a consumer, I'm more than happy to pay. You're talking to me from Berkeley, the home of the greatest food store in the world, the Berkeley Bowl. And when I go to the bowl, I almost take it for granted, Paul, that I'm paying an ethical tax. And I'm very comfortable with that. Is that what fair trade is essentially about?
I'm really glad you asked that, because in my upcoming book, which is going to be released next week on April 8th, I talk a lot about who pays for sustainability. And I think, thank you for flashing that. Number one new release in business ethics. Yes.
Already, you see? Because you're the only book ever written on business ethics. Most business books are against ethics.
So I think there is the assumption that sustainable products like organic or fair trade are going to cost us more. And I write about this in the book, Who Pays for Sustainability? And honestly, Andrew, that's a fallacy. Fair trade products don't have to cost more. And I'm going to give you an example. But I know you've interviewed John Mackey, founder of Whole Foods, on your show.
Yeah.
John in the book says, yeah, fair trade should cost more. And okay, that means that it's going to be a niche for consumers that can afford to pay a little bit more. But that doesn't mean it can't be a big niche. And it is a big niche. 30% of American shoppers today are purchasing sustainable products and paying a little bit more. However, this is why I call it a fallacy. Increasingly, brands are building that cost, whether it's fair trade or other expressions of sustainability. They're building that cost into the product. They're not upcharging the consumer, and they're gaining in terms of volume and market share. And, I work, show and tell, brother. I work with a great company called Nature Sweet. You've probably seen these snacking tomatoes. They're in every store in America. Fair trade label, loud and proud on the bottom. They introduced fair trade into their company 2 years ago, and today they're 100% fair trade, and they didn't raise the price. Why? Because they wanted to go for volume, and that's what they're doing. They're growing dramatically. They're doing a great job of taking care of their workers, and they didn't raise the price to the consumer.
How does it work, Paul, in terms of products? I'm a tea addict. I drink a huge amount of tea.
Of course you are.
And I'm not going to mention any brands, but I do drink a British brand that's very well known. I'd never really thought about this, but I probably should drink tea that is approved by fair trade, shouldn't I? I mean, especially since tea plantations are, I'm guessing, places where there might be a great deal of injustice.
Yes, sir.
How do you distinguish between a fair tea, so to speak, a fair tea plantation and one that isn't fair? In other words, how does a tea brand get on your list, get a fair trade acknowledgement?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that. And you used the word approved by Fair Trade a minute ago, and the more accurate term is certified. So let me explain what fair trade is. Fair trade is not just a philosophy and a movement. It's also a standard, right? Just like organics is a standard. Fair trade has a rigorous 200-point checklist of social, labor, and environmental criteria. And so if a tea farm or a coffee farm or banana farm or an apparel factory, because we also certify apparel, wants to participate in the fair trade movement, they have to meet these rigorous standards. They have to open their farm or their factory to an annual audit by an independent auditor who verifies that laborers are being treated appropriately, that there's no mistreatment, that there are safe working conditions, that they're getting decent wages, that the environment is being protected. And if they pass their audit, then that farm or factory is allowed to put the fair trade certified label on their product. And on the other side of the market, because we have partnerships now with almost 2,000 companies, from, in the case of tea, Numi Tea and Just Iced Tea, and working with Whole Foods and Walmart and Costco, those companies agree to reward the producer for all of their efforts to produce sustainably with a price premium. We call it the impact premium. It's not a lot of money per unit, but it ends up being a lot of money per farm because, every year these farms are selling millions of pounds of product. And so, the fair trade impact premium is enabling workers on tea plantations and farmers in the coffee highlands of Nicaragua and around the world to invest in health and education and better housing and reforestation and gender equity and incredible outcomes that are truly transformative. So I visited tea farms, fair trade tea farms in India, in Mozambique, in Sri Lanka, and those farms are growing tea in a way that probably your unnamed British brand is not accessing, which is taking care of labor, taking care of working conditions, treating the land, either growing organically or treating the land with a high level of stewardship and conservation. And that's what the fair trade certification is all about. It's about giving you as a consumer the assurance of an independent third-party audit that when that tea company, that brand, whoever we're buying from, says, well, yeah, my tea is sustainable, my tea is, coming from a farm that's fair to its workers, you have that credible independent validation of that claim.
How much is fair trade around the world, and particularly in the US, bound up with attitudes to the soil? I'm sure you're all too familiar with the regenerative agricultural movement, which focuses on the soil, is very much critical of industrial farming techniques.
Yes.
So do you think of fair trade not just in terms of how the workers are treated, but how the environment and particularly the soil is treated?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, farmers know that the connection between the social and the environmental is unbreakable, right? Like the plight of the farmer and the worker and the plight of the land, or how the land is treated, go together. You can't be environmentally sustainable but exploit the shit out of your workers. Those two attributes are deeply connected. And so in the fair trade standard, fully a third of these 200 compliance criteria address the environment, address agricultural practices. They deal with soil conservation, to your point, which includes terracing, which includes cover crops. Many of the things that now we call regenerative have been a part of the fair trade standard for almost 30 years. Our standard also requires that farmers protect the forest in and around their farms. We have a long list of chemicals, agrochemicals, that farmers are not allowed to use. You can go to Home Depot today and buy Roundup, but fair trade farmers around the world are not allowed to use Roundup because it is one of the most toxic herbicides known. And so, the association that many people have is that fair trade is good for the farmer, but it's also good for the land. It's a very much a part of our standard and our philosophy around sustainable development.
What about the issue, Paul, of meat and treatment of animals? Obviously, there's a very strong vegan movement, vegetarian movement. Some regenerative farmers focus on cultivation, on grazing. Others do away with animals entirely. How does fair trade get around that conundrum, that moral conundrum?
We are not certifying any meat products yet. Fair trade started in coffee, and then we expanded to about 40 products.
Wouldn't that be ideal? I mean, I can sense a little bit of tentativeness on that.
No,
on that question. I assume it's quite a controversial subject.
No, not at all. It's very much aligned with our approach, which is fair trade for all. Why not a fair trade everything? But our entry into new product categories, Andrew, has been driven by what I call lighthouse brands. So visionary brands that have come to us and said, wow, that fair trade coffee thing you have is really cool. Can you do it in the seafood industry? And so when we went into seafood 7 years ago, we had brand partners like Safeway and Whole Foods who brought fair trade seafood onto their shelves right out of the gate. When we launched into apparel, it wasn't because I woke up one day and wanted to help sweatshop workers. It was because Patagonia and J. Crew came to us and said, we would love for you to translate the fair trade model of agriculture to the world of factory. And so we started working with Patagonia and J. Crew. And we started working with Williams-Sonoma Inc., Pottery Barn and West Elm on fair trade furniture. So I just haven't had, a McDonald's or a, Sizzler come to me yet and say, we want fair trade beef. But when the meat products industry wakes up to the opportunity to bring greater sustainability to the supply chain, and even when they come to us, absolutely, we'll want to work with them. What I wouldn't want to do is go certify cattle ranches or cattle, or any kind of animal producing outfit, and then get them certified, run them through the paces of the fair trade standard, and then not have a market to sell it to. So for me, change starts with the market.
It's interesting that you put in those terms. I've spent some time on Joel Salatin's Polyface Farm in Virginia. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
No.
It's a meat producer. Sorry?
What is the farm?
Polyface, Polyface. Joel Salatin's one of the more controversial but influential regenerative farmers. He's been on the show too.
Okay.
And they produce farm-fed cattle meat. And last time I was there, last year, I was talking to one of the organizers of the farm, one of the executives, and they talked about the fact that it was still very hard to break into a supermarket. I wonder whether this might be a, so to speak, lucrative area for fair trade, given that a lot of consumers don't want to buy factory-fed chickens or cows.
Yeah, indeed. Well, introduce me to Joel. I'm happy to talk to him about being the first fair trade beef in the world. That would be a lot of fun. I'll tell you what.
I'm surprised, though, that they haven't. I'm assuming that someone from that industry has approached fair trade.
No, not yet. Not yet. But, what I would say is this. The consumer interest across everything that we eat and everything that we wear or put on our bodies, put in and on our bodies, the consumer interest in a more sustainable version and a more ethically sourced version of that is without a doubt the macro trend and the new normal that is coming, right? I mean, I've been in this industry now for 40 years. I can tell you 40 years ago, most companies didn't think that consumers would care about some third world farmer, pardon the expression, enough to pay 2 cents a pound more for coffee. Today, in the coffee industry, everyone's doing something around sustainability. Maybe not fair trade, maybe it's rainforest, maybe it's something else. And similarly, we have new industries coming to us every year. Have you heard of ELF Beauty, ELF Beauty? It's the second largest cosmetics company in the US. They're on fire. They joined us 2 years ago. They're already up to 80% fair trade. And, their commitment to clean, animal cruelty-free, and fair trade has really turbocharged their business, their brand. And once again, going back to does fairness cost more? They introduced fair trade into their product line and didn't raise the price. So, it's really indicative of this groundswell of consumer interest in products that are not just great tasting or that perform from a quality perspective, but also that deliver social and environmental value for the world.
Sounds a little bit too good to be true, Paul. You're in Berkeley. Silicon Valley is very good at marketing things which are too good to be true. You think of yourself as a social capitalist. People can make money and do good at the same time. Are there any weaknesses with that argument? Are there any areas where a degree of suspicion is justified? Are there any losers in this, in other words, in this win-win thing that Silicon Valley always used to talk about social media as a win-win or the internet as a win-win. And in the end, we know it's a huge lose for most of us.
Yeah.
Let me rephrase the question.
Sure.
Who objects to free trade? Where would you find people who don't agree with what you're doing?
You mean fair trade, right? Not free trade.
Yeah. Whoops, that was a Freudian error. Fair trade rather than free trade.
It's the other four-letter.
Especially on Liberation Day, we can't talk about free trade.
Indeed, right? Look, please don't conflate fair trade with the marketing nonsense of Silicon Valley. Fair trade is part of a meta movement of responsible business that is, demonstrably improving the lives of farmers and workers around the world, and demonstrably helping to protect millions of acres of farmland with more sustainable agricultural products. There's no loser. There's a competitive dynamic that will force the laggards to catch up eventually. I mean, remember, organic produce is still only 8% of the farmland in the United States. Fair trade coffee last year was 6% of all coffee beans imported into the country. So while significant in their size, these phenomena are still not the norm, right? But what's true is that organics and fair trade are growing in every single product category at more than twice the rate of sales of conventional alternatives. So in other words, we're gaining. And the only loser is the company that stays out of it, right? So in coffee, we work with everyone from high-end coffee brands to mid-tier coffee brands. You go to Safeway, very working class, mainstream grocer, you'll find fair trade coffee at Safeway. The companies that are standing down, that are standing on the sidelines, Folgers and Maxwell House, crappy coffee in a can, eventually they will be forced to enter the sustainable coffee world because they're going to get left behind by consumers who are looking for more responsible alternatives. So, I would say Folgers and Maxwell House are losing in the sense that they're losing market share, but because it's a market play, they can always jump in, and I have confidence that they will.
You're taking it for granted in fair trade, and it's certainly the case with me, that consumers are ethical, that they want to be at least ethical. So when they buy something, they want to make an ethical choice, an ethical purchase. I know in the book you get into something called the neuroscience of kindness. What does that mean? And why does that suggest that we are, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not, ethical consumers?
Yeah. I love that question. Thank you, Andrew. Look, there are very, very few people who want to feel like, because of the products that they choose, child labor was supported, And there have been exposés, child labor in the cocoa fields of West Africa, child labor in your chocolate bar, or slave labor in your shrimp. An expose about that a few years ago.
In Thailand, wasn't it?
Indeed, exactly. You saw it too. So increasingly, I think consumers are aware that there's a dark side of business. And we don't want to feel like we're supporting that. We don't want to do harm in the world. So I think the impetus, first and foremost, for ethical shopping or for responsible shopping is this do no harm ethos. But it goes beyond that. And I'm glad you referenced the research that we did in the book around the neuroscience of kindness, the neuroscience of compassion. We as humans like to feel good about ourselves because of our connection to family and community and the world. Most people, why do we donate blood? An act of selflessness. Why do people donate blood? Why do people drop $1 in a homeless person's cup? Why do people buy fair trade? Why do people do things for others? Ultimately, it's because it makes us feel good about ourselves. I mean, there's something radically selfish about doing good for others because it makes us feel good. And we buy emotional attributes with almost every product, right? Look at advertising for apparel or for cars. We're sold the cool factor, the beauty factor, right? We're used to paying for emotional attributes. So ethically sourced products is no different. We're paying for the emotional value, if you will, of feeling good about ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I love that. I love that as a nation, most of us don't like bullies and we don't like unkindness. And we do care about our neighbors.
Even on Liberation Day?
Even on Liberation Day, brother, in a nation that is so radically polarized, so disturbingly polarized, I do believe that underneath all of that is this common humanity of caring for our neighbors, for our family members, and potentially for farmers and workers around the world.
It's interesting
that we've been manipulated by the right-wing politicians.
It's interesting that you give the example of giving $1 to a homeless person on the street. Lots of homeless people, as you know, in San Francisco on the street. We've done a number of shows on homelessness, and some people argue that it's not actually in the homeless person's interest to be given money on the street because they'll just go and spend it on drugs. How do we sometimes know what the right decision is? Another one that comes to mind, I'm sure you don't have a fair trade policy when it comes to ride shares, but would you give, if there was a ride share category, would you give these new self-driving cars the fair trade stamp of approval over Uber, which is in some ways more exploitative, but at least gives people an opportunity to work still as drivers? In other words, some of this stuff, Paul, and again, you don't need me to tell you, this is ethically complex. So would you promote AI when it comes to rideshare services? It does away with jobs, but it's good for the environment. It's probably good ultimately for safety, but you can argue it on both sides.
Andrew, I've never been asked that question, and it is so far outside of my world that I don't even dare to answer. Here's the truth. There are 25 million families in the world today that grow coffee. And there are two kinds of coffee in the world. There's coffee that exploits the shit out of families and erodes the land. And there's coffee that doesn't. There's coffee that supports the land and the families who live on it. And fair trade is one of the juiciest, most powerful examples of the latter, right? But organics is another, and non-GMO is another, and rainforest certification is another. And so we as consumers, in the things that we eat every day, have a chance to choose a product that impacts the world versus a product that doesn't. It's why the title of my book is Every Purchase Matters, right? Because it does. What we buy, how we spend our money is like voting, right? We have a chance. You don't have to wait 4 years to vote for change. You can go to the store today and vote for change, vote for a more sustainable world through the products that you choose. That's my sandbox, brother.
No, and I I'm a great admirer of what you're doing. I mean, imagine if there'd been a fair trade in the 19th century when it came to buying clothing and cotton production.
A Dickinsonian version.
Yeah, and in a way, a lot of the debates about slavery, and particularly in Europe, I think in the UK, were bound up in that. Well, you've mentioned coffee a couple of times. We talked about tea.
Yeah.
What about other agricultural products, fruit in particular? Is that an area that you're very much focused on at Fairtrade? In other words, every purchase matters when it comes to buying our apples or our oranges. I always get the sense that there's a great deal of exploitation in that sector.
Andrew, you're right. The men and women who pick our fruit and vegetables often receive below poverty wages. Actually, Human Rights Watch did research into the wages of agricultural workers in the United States and found that 40% of all agricultural workers in the US live below the poverty level. So, both abroad and in the US, the people who work in fresh produce need our help. And we can't assume that, a delicious apple or banana is being sourced in a sustainable way unless we see a label on it. And so, go to grocery stores today, you're going to see a growing number of fair trade certified fruits and vegetables. In fact, last year, of all the product categories that we work in, and we're working in everything from coffee and tea to chocolate and sugar and coconut products and fresh fruits and vegetables, apparel, seafood, cosmetics, furniture, right? So in all of these...
Furniture, I never heard of the furniture one. You slipped that one in.
Pottery Barn has fair trade furniture. West Elm, fair trade furniture. It's really interesting. But fresh produce was the fastest growing segment of fair trade last year. We grew by 32% last year alone. And that was primarily due, I think, to, again, Americans' growing interest in more sustainable, healthier produce and healthier food.
Are there too many stickers, Paul, in a place like Berkeley Bowl? Of course, you somehow, I intuitively anyway, I just trust what I'm buying because I trust the store. Less so with Whole Foods. There's the organic sticker. There's the fair trade sticker. Does there need to be one kind of meta ethical sticker that covers all these categories so that we trust what we're buying?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it is true that a lot of packaging today looks like a NASCAR race car with all the logos on the side. And, we've heard people talk about the possibility of consumer confusion around the proliferation of sustainability labels. There's no evidence, however, that a discerning consumer that cares about these issues looks at a package, like here's a brand that we work with. You can see there are like 5 labels on it. Consumers who care don't look at the package and go, oh, too many labels. I don't know what that means. I'm going to go buy something that has no sustainability claims whatsoever, right? Conscious consumers read the label. They go online afterward. They may not understand the label when they first see it, but then they go online, they do their research, and evidence of this, growing market need for more information is the fact that all of these certifications are growing and certified products are growing. So I think what happens is what we're seeing is that consumers increasingly have an appetite to know what the hell we're eating. What are the attributes? Is it gluten-free or not? Is it organic, fair trade? Like, tell me more about the product so that I can make an informed decision. So we're evolving as consumers from mindless shoppers to mindful shoppers. We're starting to think about the attributes of the product, including the farmer that grew that product and the ecosystem where it comes from. And, if you look at the data on this, studies show that anywhere from a third to half of American consumers today. So that's anywhere from 80 to 120 American adult shoppers are either regularly or occasionally buying what you would call a sustainable product, typically fair trade, organic, non-GMO, something like that. So, this is moving into the mainstream, and it's moving quickly. And, sustainable products grew quite dramatically during the first Trump presidency. Fair trade sales were on a hockey stick during that period. And I am hoping and anticipating in the next 4 years, with all the nonsense that's happening, with the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords, and the nonsense of tariffs and the deregulation of protections for workers and for the land, I'm anticipating a groundswell of consumer interest in finding other ways to make a difference. And you know what? The products that we choose are one of the easiest ways that we all can lift our voice and make a difference in the world.
Yeah, it's an excellent idea. It's more than an idea. Can I get your fair trade approval for this podcast? I haven't used any child labor involved in this. Maybe you should get into the podcast gradually. Finally, Paul, in all seriousness, what about products that are deemed broadly unhealthy? Tobacco comes to mind, but increasingly alcohol as well. How do you deal with those kinds of products?
It's a great question, and we had to answer it a few years ago when the wine industry came to us and asked us, would we certify their farms? And a year later, one of the largest rum producers in the world came to us. Rum is made with sugarcane. Sugarcane is one of the hardest crops on workers. Typically around the world, sugarcane is harvested by hand. There's a lot of exploitation of labor in the sugarcane industry. And this rum company, a company called Flor de Caña, came to us and said, we'd like to be the first fair trade rum in the world. And so we had to make them, the moral judgment, if you will, about whether fair trade and alcohol mix. And, here's where we landed. We talked with the activists. We talked with the retailers. We always engage our stakeholders before we make any major strategic decision, because fair trade is a movement and you want to hear from all sides of the movement, even if you can't please everyone. Here's what the overwhelming feedback was. Workers in the sugarcane industry, workers on vineyards deserve a fair wage just as much as workers in an apparel factory or on a coffee farm. Of course you should certify wine. Of course you should certify sugarcane that's being made into rum. And so we did. And I'm proud to say that brand, Flor de Caña, has won so many awards, not only for the quality of the rum, but also the sustainability of the farms. So we're very proud to work with them. We're very proud of the impact. And, I have yet to have some kind of prohibition era like complaint. Like, why in the hell are you certifying alcohol? Alcohol is evil. Well, yeah, okay. I mean, alcoholism is a problem for sure, but the workers on those farms deserve a fair deal. And I'm proud of the work that we're doing with them. Haven't had a tobacco company come to me yet, but I sit on a board with George Clooney, and Clooney said something at a recent board meeting. He said his grandfather was a tobacco farmer in Virginia, and George used to work on the farm. And he said, even though I was family, we all got shit wages. He said, there's so much poverty among farm workers in the tobacco industry. He said, we need fair trade in tobacco. So I don't know. I haven't been asked by any tobacco companies yet, and I'm not sure. That's a little harder than alcohol, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, maybe you should do marijuana, but it's Happy Liberation Day. I think to celebrate, everyone should go to the fair trade. They need to order Paul's book, Every Purchase Matters. It's an important new book. And then go to the fair trade website and sign up, and make sure the next time you go to the store, you get fair trade certified products. So congratulations, Paul Rice. I was going to call you Paul Price, but Paul Rice. The price is right. Founder of Fair Trade USA. Congratulations on the new book and the remarkable achievement of turning an idea into a serious, if not business, public interest group in the United States. So thank you so much.
Andrew, thank you. I really appreciate your thoughtful and probing questions. You kept me on my toes the whole time, and I'm grateful for the help in getting the word out.
And I get the fair price stamp of approval.
Well, you get the Liberation Day stamp of approval. How's that?
That's better than nothing. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thanks, Andrew.